What is the first thing that pops into your head when you hear the phrase Greek mythology? Chances are it's a majestic Zeus wielding a lightning bolt, Hercules acting as a noble superhero, and a sinister Hades plotting evil schemes down in his underworld lair. It's a clean, comfortable, easy-to-digest fairy tale that Hollywood has carefully packaged for us. But what if I told you that almost all of it is absolute nonsense? Pop culture hasn't just simplified Greek myths, it has completely rewritten them, stripping away their deepest and most profound meanings. The real Mount Olympus wasn't a pantheon of righteous protectors. It was an elite club of psychopaths, narcissists, and abusers. And those we've been conditioned to view as monsters were often just helpless victims. Today, we are stripping away that polished Hollywood gloss. We are breaking down the 4 major misconceptions about ancient Greek mythology that you probably still take as gospel. We'll discover why Hades was actually the most stable god on Olympus, the horrifying crime Heracles was truly punishing himself for, and how a simple translation blunder in the 16th century permanently altered the story of Pandora. Strap in. Welcome to the real ancient Greece.
Let's start with one of the most unfair casting choices in cinematic history. In movies like Clash of the Titans or Disney's Hercules, Hades is consistently framed as the Greek equivalent of Satan. He's pale, he lives underground, he schemes in the dark, and he desperately wants to overthrow Zeus. But let's actually open the ancient sources. In classical Greek tradition, Hades was never evil. In fact, when compared to his brothers Zeus and Poseidon, he looks like the only mature, mentally stable adult in the entire pantheon. How did he even end up underground? He didn't lose a war. After defeating the Titans, the 3 brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, literally drew lots to divide the universe. Zeus won the sky, Poseidon won the sea, and Hades drew the underworld. And Hades simply went to work. He didn't complain, he didn't launch a rebellion. He took on a grim, exhausting, but bureaucratically essential job, maintaining the balance of souls. While Zeus was constantly sneaking down to Earth disguised as swans and bulls to seduce unsuspecting mortals, and Poseidon was flooding ships and triggering earthquakes and fits of rage, Hades sat in his realm, keeping a strict, orderly ledger. He was pragmatic, he was just, and shockingly, for a Greek god, he was a faithful husband. Yes, the myth of Persephone's abduction sounds horrifying by modern standards, but in the context of the myths, Hades genuinely loved his wife, didn't cheat on her constantly, and shared his throne with her as an equal ruler.
Did the Greeks fear Hades? Absolutely, but not because he was evil. They feared his absolute certainty. Death comes for everyone, and Hades could not be bribed, flattered, or reasoned with. He was the ultimate, impartial judge. The Greeks were so terrified of drawing his attention that they wouldn't even say his name out loud, substituting it with Pluton, meaning the wealthy one, a nod to the precious minerals and gold hidden deep beneath the earth. So, stop comparing Hades to the devil. If you had to pick one of the 3 brothers to spend an evening with, Hades would be your safest, most predictable bet by a mile.
Since we mentioned Disney, let's talk about their golden boy. In the public imagination, Hercules, or Heracles to use his proper Greek name, is a noble, heroic meathead, an athlete who completes 12 labors for glory, fame, and a VIP ticket back to Olympus. He's the ultimate ancient superhero. But the real myth isn't a superhero comic. It is a deeply disturbing, bloody, psychological tragedy. Let's look at his name first. Heracles literally translates to glory of Hera. The dark irony here is that Hera, the queen of the gods, hated this child with every fiber of her being because he was the living proof of her husband Zeus's rampant infidelity. Hera hunted Heracles his entire life, and her most horrific act of revenge came when Heracles was a grown, highly successful man. A legendary hero who had a beautiful wife, Megara, and 3 loving children. Hera cursed Heracles with a sudden, pitch-black fit of absolute madness. In his severe delusion, Heracles hallucinated that his home was being besieged by enemies, and that his own children were monsters born of the Titans. In this blind, hysterical frenzy, Heracles slaughtered his wife and all of his children with his own hands. When the madness finally lifted and he woke up in a pool of his own family's blood, Heracles was entirely broken. He wanted to end his own life. Desperate to find a way to atone for this monstrous sin, even though it wasn't technically his fault, he traveled to the Oracle of Delphi. The Oracle delivered a grim verdict. You must go into the service of the cowardly King Eurystheus and execute 10, which later became 12 of his absolute commands. Think about that for a second. The 12 labors weren't a tryout for an elite superhero team. They were a brutal, humiliating penance. Slave labor to pay for infanticide. Every single time Heracles fought the Hydra or chased the Erymanthian boar, he wasn't doing it for the applause. He was desperately trying to drown out the voices in his head and wash the blood off his hands. In this light, Heracles isn't a triumphant hero. He's a broken man trying to piece his shattered soul back together. Sometimes, pop culture lies to us, not because it wants to make a story sexier, but simply because someone, centuries ago, was bad at translating a foreign language. Our third block exposes the sheer power of mistranslation, which accidentally invented 2 monumental cultural myths, Pandora's box and the Achilles heel. Let's start with Pandora. Everyone knows the drill. A curious woman opens a forbidden box, unleashing all the evils, diseases, and hardships into the world, leaving only hope trapped at the bottom. It's a neat, poetic story, right? Except for one detail. There was no box. In the original ancient text by the poet Hesiod, Pandora opens an object called a pithos. A pithos is a massive, heavy clay storage jar, often as tall as a human being, which the Greeks used to store wine, grain, or olive oil. Storing evils inside a giant agricultural jar made perfect sense to the Greeks. It was a metaphor for a storehouse where things could spoil or rot if left untended. So where did the box come from? Enter the 16th century. A Dutch humanist and scholar named Erasmus of Rotterdam was translating Hesiod into Latin. He accidentally confused the Greek word pithos, jar, with the word pyxis, which means a small box or a decorative casket. The error went to print, spread across Europe, and for 500 years we've been using the idiom Pandora's box, a concept that literally did not exist in antiquity. And what about Achilles, the ultimate warrior of the Trojan War, whose goddess mother, Thetis, dipped him into the sacred waters of the river Styx by his heel, leaving that one spot vulnerable? It's the definitive myth about hidden weakness. But if you actually open the Iliad by Homer, the oldest and most authoritative source on the Trojan War, you are in for a massive shock. In the entire epic, Achilles has no superpowers. He is not invulnerable. He is just an extraordinarily talented, strong, and terrifyingly fast soldier. In fact, in Book 21 of the Iliad, Homer explicitly describes Achilles being wounded in the elbow by a spear thrown by Asteropaeus, drawing actual blood. The story about being dipped in the Styx and having a vulnerable heel was completely made up by Roman poets, specifically Statius, nearly 800 years after Homer. The Romans just wanted a flashy, metaphorical concept. But Homer's Achilles went into battle knowing that his skin could be cut by bronze just as easily as any other man's. And honestly, doesn't that make his bravery infinitely more compelling? Finally, we have to talk about Medusa, the ultimate mythological boss fight. A hideous monster with writhing snakes for hair, capable of turning any living creature to stone with a single glance. Perseus slicing off her head is historically framed as a classic triumph of pure good over absolute evil. But if we look beneath the surface of this myth, particularly through the lens of the Roman poet Ovid, we find what is perhaps the most devastating and unjust story of victim blaming in human history. Originally, Medusa was not a monster. She was an exceptionally beautiful mortal woman, renowned for her stunning hair. Her beauty was so pure that she became a priestess in the temple of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and virginity. Athena's priestesses took a sacred vow of celibacy. The tragedy begins when Poseidon, the god of the sea, notorious for his violent temper and utter disregard for boundaries, notices her. Poseidon corners Medusa and violently assaults her directly on the floor of Athena's sacred temple. Medusa was a victim of a horrific crime. She prayed desperately to her goddess for protection.
But when Athena returns to her defiled temple, she is furious. Yet she doesn't direct her rage at Poseidon, because he is a powerful male god, the brother of Zeus. Instead, Athena turns her wrath on the helpless, traumatized Medusa. Because her sacred space was polluted, Athena punishes the victim. She transforms Medusa's beautiful hair, the very thing that attracted men, into hissing, venomous vipers. And she curses her face to be so grotesque that anyone who looks at her will instantly turn into cold, dead stone. Medusa is banished to a desolate island, doomed to live in absolute isolation, unable to look at another living thing without killing it. Her isolation wasn't the choice of a bloodthirsty monster, it was the forced quarantine of a traumatized victim. So when Perseus arrives to claim her head, he isn't slaying a beast trying to conquer the world. He is executing a deeply traumatized woman trapped inside her own monstrous body. A woman for whom
Death was likely the only escape from an eternal nightmare. Why does any of this matter? Why shouldn't we just leave the Hollywood versions alone? Because Greek myths were never meant to be just bedtime stories for children or Bronze Age comic books. For the ancient Greeks, mythology was their language for philosophy and psychology. They didn't have clinical terms like post-traumatic stress disorder, clinical depression, or victim blaming. But they had the myth of Heracles trying to wash away his sins, and the myth of Medusa being punished for a crime committed against her. Through these narratives, they explained the inherent unfairness of the universe, the brutality of nature, and the darkness dwelling inside the human condition. When we strip away the Disney gloss and the Hollywood special effects, we don't just find dusty old fairy tales. We find a mirror that humanity has been staring into for 3,000 years. And the truths reflected in that mirror are just as relevant today as they were back then. Thank you for watching this video essay until the very end. Which of these misconceptions shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dives into the history pop culture keeps trying to hide from us. See you next time.